We recognize that this is a critical area of work. This task force has actually focused their time and energies looking at a few sets of questions. First, what must African governments, the US, and civil society do to protect press freedom? Second, what is the role of media in promoting democracy? And third, what is the role of new media? So we are going to begin with the spokesperson from that panel, who is Henry Maina, the Director of East and Horn of Africa for Article 19. Henry worked in the human rights sector for 10 years before coming to Article 19 in 2008, specializing in criminal justice and human rights education at Legal Resources Foundation. He is an expert in advocacy and governance. He's a program manager, a fundraiser. He's got a huge hat that he wears. But the task force has recommended him to present their key conclusions. So Henry, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. The team was made up of 16 participants from the 5 sub-regions of the continent. So we got information that could be generalized, even though we may need extra work to be done on specific countries. I think in spelling out what we know as the role of the media, the group reiterated the issue that the media has a role to educate, inform, and entertain. But we pointed it out that in the role of education, they have a key role in holding to account all public officials, and also they have a critical role in cultural socialization. But the other role that we pointed out, that they have a role in validating positive and inclusive development processes, including participatory democracy. But before we go to the issue of challenges that may still be there, I think just a brief on how far the continent has come over the years. I think it's important to state that all countries, except Eritrea, in Africa have in some way liberalized the media sector. However, there are challenges that continue to exist. Recent monitoring indicators point out that there are only 4 countries in Africa that could be rated as free. 25 are partly free, and 23 are not free at all. The media itself continues to report in a highly sensational and partisan way. Further, there are only 13 countries on the continent that have access to information laws. But where such laws exist, they continue to be inconsistent with best practices on access to information, and they are characterized by poor implementation. So that is one side of the issues that we would be talking to. The other is to begin pointing out that Africa has also witnessed exponential growth in access to the internet and the mobile telephony. However, so far, only 7% of the global internet users are in Africa. So it is just estimated that about 16% of the African population has access to the internet. And it is estimated that we have about 51 million Facebook subscribers. So yes, these have unleashed new avenues for civic engagement and citizen journalism. However, we need to point out that mobile telephony and internet are not yet ubiquitous. The group pointed out 8 clear challenges and problems that we need to face and address ourselves to. And one is that the media has not been seen as a critical sector to the emerging democratic and developmental state in Africa. 2, that Africa is replete with cases of violence, torture, intimidation of journalists, and media workers. As we speak today, one of our group members is to go through a trial in Angola, purely for publishing a book. There is a journalist who is in jail for 2 years on a contempt of court charge in Swaziland. And the same runs. A number of journalists have been killed. Deida Hydra in Gambia, it's nearly 10 years. Said Abraham in South Sudan, many in Somalia, and nothing has been done in holding to account those perpetrators. We all know the Zone 9 bloggers in Ethiopia. They are being tried for just using their mobile phones and websites. There is nothing wrong they've done. But you have a bigger challenge in Eritrea, where 14 years ago, 22 journalists were incarcerated without trial. They continue to remain in incarceration. Most African countries also continue to keep laws and regulatory practices that unduly limit freedom of expression. And there are fourth, issues of poor working conditions for journalists and media workers on the continent, and this particularly affects women journalists. I've pointed out the issue that except Eritrea, all other countries have a form of liberalized media. But the veneer of private media is not a guarantee for independence, pluralism, and diversity. State broadcasters continue to serve the interests of those in political power and not national public interests. So you have a situation where if it is Uganda Broadcasting Corporation or Zimbabwe Broadcasting Corporation or Kenya Broadcasting Corporation, they are presidential units of communication. Low capacity within most media across the continent is also a challenge because they can't effectively report on developmental issues. But 7, there is clear underrepresentation of women as managers, workers, and sources of information in most traditional media. And lastly, that the issue of penetration of accessible and affordable internet and mobile telephony continues to be hampered because most states have left it in the hands of the private actors who have not seen economic sense in ensuring universal access. We made certain recommendations to a few actors, but one general recommendation is that the media must be seen as central to all discussions on the post-2015 Sustainable Development Goals and the ongoing US-Africa trade partnerships. To the US government, we pointed out that there is need for the US government to deal with the incoherence that oftentimes is witnessed between the rhetoric in Washington and the practice of the respective US missions in different countries. The second recommendation to the US government was that there is need for the government to seek to develop clear media support programs within its USAID program portfolios. And 3, that the government must seek to balance its support of counterterrorism processes and laws with clear protection of freedom of expression, media, and access to information. National security is not in itself more important than all these other rights. To media agencies, we point out that international media networks must endeavor to cover Africa differently and holistically, as opposed to the continued narrative of Africa being the hopeless continent of disease, death, and desperation. For governments in Africa, we pointed out the need that all governments must repeal and review repressive laws that unduly restrict freedom of expression. Such laws like criminal defamation, insult laws, sedition, and publication of false news. In terms of access to information, we would like countries to benchmark with the model law on access to information so that those that have laws review them to be in tandem with the benchmark, but those that do not have laws, pass laws that are comprehensive enough and begin programs to implement them. On the issues of violation, we would recommend that governments institute credible investigations on processes to bring all those who've been deemed to be culpable in the violations against journalists to book. We would also appreciate if governments established independent media regulatory mechanisms with a view to ensure media pluralism, diversity, and transparency. And this is critical, especially as we go into the digital switchover process, which is fraught with corruption. Third last, for the governments, we ask African governments to utilize African peer review mechanism, UN Universal Periodic Review processes and recommendations to improve the situation and the role of media in development. But we also ask governments to establish clear and transparent policies on proportionate state advertising that promotes independent media and is not used to stifle critical media organizations. At the intergovernmental organizations level, we point out that the World Bank, African Development Bank, and UN agencies should offer leadership by promulgating access to information policies that enable African citizens to know their dealings with their respective governments, but also to develop clear support programs to the media. At the UN level, we point out that the UN treaty bodies and special mandate holders must underscore the centrality of media freedom and access to information as fundamental rights by themselves, but also as instrumental rights in protection of economic and social rights. For the African Commission, we point out that the African Union Commission must show leadership in assisting states to ratify and meet their obligations under the international and regional human rights treaties and support positive comparative learning across the continent. We noted negative learning need not be supported because it seems to just be happening naturally. The African Commission on Human and People's Rights must be supported to undertake both monitoring and promotional work. But we also advise that the African Union Commission must undertake, through the Legal Directorate, to review the recently promulgated Convention on Cybersecurity so that ICT is seen as an enabler of efforts for the African economies to be knowledge and information based and to be in line with 2063 development goals. For civil society organizations and development agencies, we recommend that civil society organizations must develop clear programming to support media freedom and not just use media as a communication tool for their work. For media practitioners, we ask media houses to develop and implement clear gender and sexual harassment policies, but we also ask media practitioners to form solidarity networks so that they can support each other whenever they find themselves in distress. We need programs to support women journalists so that they can, through targeted mentorship programs, be retained in media houses and develop in their career. For the private sector, we encourage multinational corporations to advertise and invest in select media houses in different countries, as this would help perhaps lessen the political capture that is on the media industry in Africa, but also allow ICT and knowledge transfer so that Africa need not go through the slow progress of development. We can have a digital leap and catch up with the other countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Henry Moina, for leading this task force and presenting so coherently and clearly the recommendations from the team. Before we go to the task force, we wanted to take a minute. This is sort of to thank our sponsor. The lunch that many of you enjoyed today, as well as a reception this evening, are sponsored by Facebook, and they have a quick announcement to share with us at this moment. Welcome. And this is Matt Perot, who is the head of public policy for Facebook. The floor is yours.
Thanks very much. I'm actually going to refuse to accept that promotion. I'm not the head of public policy at Facebook. I run a small policy team within a small policy development team within our public policy team. I'm the head of policy development at Facebook. But I appreciate the promotion. My boss, Marnie, would be very disappointed to learn about it, though. So I'm going to be super brief in my remarks. It sounds like you had an incredibly productive day yesterday. It's fascinating to hear about what you discussed. It seems like there are two key themes, and I think both of them are actually very relevant to the work that we do at Facebook. The first, it sounds like, is access, and the second is the free flow of information. Both are issues that we deal with a lot in our day-to-day work right now. So I'll take them in turn. So in access, a year ago, almost exactly a year ago, late August last year, Mark Zuckerberg announced Internet.org, which is an initiative to bring the next 4.5 billion people online. It's an ambitious goal, like all of Mark's goals, and we've had a year of progress on that front. One surprising fact is that 85% of the world's population already lives within areas that are covered by existing cellular coverage. And so that begs the question, then, why aren't people who are covered within a cellular network actually accessing the internet? And we think that there are two main sources of that. The first is affordability. People find getting online to be very costly. And the second is relevance, meaning that there isn't a sufficient amount of content that's relevant, meaning that it's relevant to people in a particular market and that it's in a local language. So we've been focused on those issues at Facebook and tackling these issues around accessibility. Last Thursday, we announced an exciting new initiative in Zambia, the launch of our Internet.org app, which is an app that gives access to free basic services. So that means you don't pay registration fees or anything for the content, and your data access is actually provided free of charge as well. We did this in partnership with Airtel. This is an exciting new thing for us. So we're providing a suite of basic services that includes health information, and includes job boards, that includes messaging applications, that includes Google search, it includes Wikipedia. And we think that this is something that's going to allow people to come online for the first time in Zambia. So we're really excited about that. The other issue that it sounds like you tackled yesterday is related to the free flow of information, which is stuff that we work on the policy team every day. And so I think free flow of information is really core to our mission. You can't connect the world if there are barriers standing in the way of how people share information. So we're very focused on making sure that when people come online, they come online in a way where there's a robust amount of content, where they can speak freely and openly, where they don't have to fear about surveillance, and so those are issues that we're tackled on, that we tackle every day as well. So I'm interested to hear more about what the panel discussed yesterday, and interesting to hear the questions from the audience. Thank you.
Join me in thanking Matt not only for correcting his title, but really for the work and the vision that they're doing. We at ThoughtWorks, as technology leaders as well, understand the power of innovation to change the world. And we applaud you for all the efforts that you're doing here and on the continent. With that, we're going to now turn to our task force members, and I will list the task force members so that you all know who they are and all their brilliance, and then we will give them time to give comments as well. So we have Fatoumata Abdou from Mali, Mohamed Benjema from Tunisia, Chong Pak Chang from iRadio in South Sudan, John Gatluk, Interviews Community Radio Network from South Sudan. We have Kumba Gore from Sky Radio in Sierra Leone. We have Linus Gital from National Media Group in Kenya. We have Caprona Kebone from Chamber of Commerce in Kenya. And of course, Henry, we've already introduced, who's chairing the task force. Mandala Mambulasa from Malawi Law Society. Chris Marlowe from Internews Community Radio Network in South Sudan. Rafael Mark de Moal from Maka, Angola, Batakan Marika from Independent Activists and former journalist from Ethiopia, Dr. Maat Monjib from Morocco, and Chris Noyot, Nigerian Labor Council. We are honored to have all of you here in all your brilliance. We give you now the floor to share additional comments, and as you give your comments, please just repeat your name and organization.
Good afternoon, everyone. I think you have heard a lot from my colleague, which is the head of the caucus. One of the things that I just want to add on what we have come up as a group is there's a need, like we mentioned about women in other countries like South Sudan. You find the illiteracy rate of women is 85%. And these people have gone into war, and you find that the people who have been affected so much are the women, and there is a need to involve women in media sector. And the reason why we need women is because majority are women, and you find that if you have program that are dedicated to women, there's a need to have a women presenters on the radio, and this can encourage the other fellow women to listen to the radio. So that's one of the things that just need to be done. The other things we have talked about the challenges, especially journalists that are being attacked, some of the journalists that are in jail, some got killed. There's a need for the U.S. government to engage with African leaders to ensure that the freedom of expression, freedom of association is exercised, and people should be given a platform for all the other political parties, so that when there is things that are happening, so when like election, there should be a freedom of all political parties to participate, and also to ensure that they have a freedom to talk on the radio, so that they could be able to educate people on what are some of the things that they would like to do if they get an opportunity to come to power. But you find that that's one of the big challenges on the media sector. You find when election are almost happening, the government or the state will try to take an upper hand, or the winner take all, trying to control the media so that the other political parties do not get an opportunity for them to have to express their platform to the public. And this is one of the things that the rest of the colleagues were talking about on the election, whereby that people, they will go and vote and they will not know what they are. It is because there is no an opportunity for them to educate the people. So like my colleague, the media has a great role to play, and there's a need for the media houses to be given an opportunity, and also to do responsible, like some of them, the other leaders, they said, okay, you need to be responsible. But being responsible, in other words, means that you don't need to talk on things that touch the government. So the government doesn't want to look at the negative side. So there's a need for the government to recognize that the media is a mirror where they could be able to see themselves. And if you have a mirror in your house and you don't look into it, you don't see how you dress, so you will not see yourself that you are going in a wrong way. So there's a need for our leaders in Africa to recognize that the media is the watchdog for them. They should be able to allow the media so that they could be able to correct on some of the areas where they are going wrong. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And please, again, just repeat your name and affiliation.
Okay. My name is David Dokedu. I represent the Public Services International as the Regional Secretary for Africa and the Arab region. I just wanted to emphasize the importance of decent work for media people in Africa. Media workers in Africa are really suffering because many of them are working under repressive regime. The governments of our countries sometimes even use the management. They use the management to intimidate the media personnel for publishing and then writing issues which are objectively affecting the countries that they represent. Most governments will want the media owners to tilt information in their favor. And when the media people do not do this, they suffer the consequences of either being demoted, sacked, or imprisoned. And we believe that the issues of decent work do not only apply to workers in other sectors, but they also apply to workers who are in the media sector. And it's also important for us to see how best we could support workers in the media to organize themselves into the trade union movement so that they can have a voice at various levels on the continent, right from the sub-regional level up to the regional level of the African Union, so that we can see more development and more progression in the work and the life of the media people in Africa. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Please.
Bonjour, mon nom est Mohamed Benjema. Je suis tunisien. Je travaille comme gestionnaire des mesures de performance à l'Université d'Ottawa au Canada et je suis vice-président de l'Observatoire citoyen des médias en Tunisie. En plus de ce qui a été retenu dans le document de notre groupe de travail sur les médias, j'aimerais attirer l'attention sur le cas particulier de la Tunisie. Je viens de ce pays, de l'Afrique du Nord, qui connaît la plupart des défis mentionnés et connus actuellement dans les autres pays africains, mais où la société civile a presque gagné dans les 3 dernières années la bataille de la liberté d'expression et la liberté des médias. Je crois que le principal défi actuellement en Tunisie, au niveau des médias, n'est plus la liberté de l'information, mais plutôt le droit des citoyens à l'information véridique et non mensongère, parce que le secteur des médias est devenu dominé par les partis politiques, en plus du secteur privé, et parce que les mêmes médias qui exerçaient la désinformation avant la révolution en 2011 continuent à dominer la scène avec les mêmes méthodes. Et je pense que pour éviter l'ingérence de l'État, mais assurer en même temps la qualité de l'information, il faut créer et supporter des organismes civils qui observent les médias, qui documentent leurs erreurs professionnelles et qui rapportent les différents types de biais et d'alignements politiques chez les médias. Si les médias constituent un 4e pouvoir qui exerce et critique et fait l'observation des autres pouvoirs, la société civile doit défendre ce rôle et veiller à ce qu'il soit exercé dans le bien du citoyen. Merci.
Merci pour votre intervention. And now we go to one of our sisters down the end. Please again
Yes.
state your name and affiliation.
My name is Kumbagwori. I work for Sky Women's World Network in Sierra Leone. My point here is I want to again emphasize the underrepresentation of women in the media. In some of our African countries, the women are underrepresented in the media, and this problem spans right from the non-education of the girl child. And our political leaders in some of our African countries, these are some of the yardsticks that they use. When you want to talk, they tell you we do not have better educated women to represent women in the media. So that is why my recommendation is the focus on the education of the right of the girl child, because it is the girl child that turns into a woman in society. And again, another point is traditional practices, cultural practices, and some of these laws are enshrined in some of our constitutions, and whilst others are not enshrined in the Constitution. My recommendation for the ones that are enshrined in our Constitution is for these laws to be repealed. They are old and draconian. For any country to be a democratic state and for a country to be practicing a good governance, it all depends on gender equality. So we want more space for women in the media. And again, for the cultural practices and beliefs in some of our African communities, I also recommend that we take into cognizance civic education to our traditional leaders, because some of these traditional leaders believe that the work of the woman should just be in the kitchen, doing house chores and giving birth to babies. And they have that tradition, they have it. Even when you go there, you try to talk to them, they tell you, you are coming with the white man's idea here. We are born, we met some of these laws, we met our forefathers practicing them. So we need to intensify civic education on the women's participation in all spheres of life, not only with the media, but also in politics, leadership, inclusion, and participation in our communities.
Thank you very much. And now we are getting a bit short on time. So if I can ask those 3 remaining people who have their hands up to be very brief, we'll give you each the floor, but just for a very brief time so we can go to our audience. Okay? Thank you. So we start here.
Good afternoon. My name is John Galwak. I come from South Sudan, work for Community Radio Network. To add on top of what the rest of my colleagues said, I think there is also a need of funding for the media sectors in African country because if they get that funding, that will help to develop professional training programs that would help the media sector stand firmly to their task. Because if they do not have such a good funding, they intend to lean on the institution that help or that fund them. I think that need a lot to be done, and I urge the USAID or the US government, when channeling funding to African countries on developmental sectors, they can also reconsider much effort on the media.
Brilliant, thank you. Please.
Good afternoon. My name is Kong Pal Chang. I come from South Sudan. I manage a radio station there. Something that we talked about also is for civil society organization or the U.S. government to work closely with the African governments or leaders to make sure that the environment for media is allowed to be free, because one of the stressing issue here is absence of media law in most countries. Like where I come from, we don't have media law because according to the Minister of Information there, he don't know where the media bill is because it disappeared between his office and the president's office. So I think with the pressure from civil society or the governments, friendly governments, it can help when there is media bill. Then now journalists will know what they are supposed to do and what they are not supposed to do. And also, and in the absence of media bill, then you are forced to impose self-censorship where you will not be balancing your story or your program. For example, in the recent day in South Sudan, the minister himself said that if you try to balance or to bring the voice of the opposition, then we will use penal code on you. And the penal code in South Sudan, it says that if you apply, they can say that you are spreading false information, and that means you face the law. And here, because we don't have media bill that has been there, it make it hard for media to operate in that environment. So here it gives the government upper hand to oppress or to not allow to make the environment of the media more difficult for journalists to work.
Okay,
yeah.
Thank you. If we could just move
Thank
to
you.
the last person. Thank you very much. Just in the interest of time. Thank you.
Bonsoir, c'est Fatoumata Abdou, je suis journaliste, je viens du Mali. Je vais encore revenir là-dessus parce qu'à mon avis, il n'est pas assez de parler de ce problème-là, ça veut dire, qui est l'implication et surtout la formation des femmes dans le domaine des médias. J'aime dire ça et je crois que ça doit être vraiment un combat dans le domaine des médias là. Que les femmes soient formées parce que ça demeure un atout pour les États africains. Si on assiste aujourd'hui à la bastonnade et puis à l'emprisonnement des journalistes, c'est parce que les États africains, les dirigeants africains sont conscients de la force que représentent ces gens-là et de la force que représente la presse. C'est pas pour rien qu'on dit que la presse est le quatrième pouvoir. C'est une force à part, il faut qu'on mette l'accent sur cette force-là. Parce que tant que les dirigeants africains ne voient pas la presse, dans son rôle, on ne va jamais s'en sortir de la mauvaise gouvernance, du manque d'information, du manque de communication qu'on est en train de vivre de nos jours en Afrique. Je vais vous donner un petit exemple, si vous me permettez. Les djihadistes qui ont envahi le nord du Mali avaient peur là où ils trouvaient qu'il y avait une femme dans les radios communautaires sur place. J'en suis un exemple. On dit que les femmes, vous les femmes, on vous écoute, moi particulièrement. On dit parce que toi, on sait qu'on t'écoute, donc on n'a pas besoin de toi. Parce qu'ils savent, eux-mêmes, les djihadistes ont peur des femmes dans les médias. Ça veut dire que les femmes ont un très grand rôle à jouer dans les médias. Il faut qu'on mette l'accent, que le gouvernement des États-Unis aide dans la formation des femmes dans le domaine des médias. Je vous remercie.
Merci beaucoup, madame. Okay, with that slate of issues to underscore, from funding for the sector, organizing, unionizing the sector, repealing harmful laws, raising up the profile, understanding the importance of women, quite a slate of issues. We now turn to you. There are 2 microphones, one on each side, and we're just going to ask you to please, if you have questions, comments, please just come to the microphone. And as you come to the microphone, please give your name and your affiliation. We'll try to take maybe 3 or so, if we have them, questions at a time, and then go back to our task force to reflect on those questions and comments. So please make sure the microphone is on, and then you have the floor. Welcome. Okay, well, since that one is on, we start with you. Go right ahead.
Is it on?
Yes.
Okay, good. Good afternoon. My name is Pelek Matthew, and I'm from South Sudan. Mine is more of a concern and somehow a recommendation. When the conflict broke out in South Sudan in December, a lot of hate speech and hate speech basically was done on social media and perpetuated by people in the diaspora, not people within the country. And when by diaspora, the United States is one of the countries that people within the US, South Sudanese, were having hate speech all over social media, specifically on Facebook. Sometimes when we speak about media, we don't look at the other side of it. So on this, when looking at this situation, can we recommend that the United States, since they have laws against hate speech, do something about people who, to penalize basically people who perpetuate hate speech on social media, and it doesn't really affect them because they're outside of the country where the conflict is actually happening? Thank you.
Thank you. We move to this side.
Good afternoon. My name is Homa. I'm from Indian Ocean Island, from Mauritius and Seychelles. So maybe 2 small comments. I wanted to, usually when the media, they cover all the bad news everywhere, and really the good practices of the civil society, for example, they are not really covered. They are not really, they don't really put enough emphasis on that. And the second thing is, I think we need really this education of our media, I can say family, because they usually cover what the minister says, what the president says. But when it's the time for, to present something what the civil society says, and they are really absent. So I think it's not fair. If we have to educate the grassroots, the people, so the media is the really most efficient tools.
Thank you. Please.
My name is Arthur Gwagwa. I'm Zimbabwean, but currently based in London. And my research areas, Henry knows, is surveillance, privacy, and issues of modern technologies. I think next week we're going to be having a consultation with, I've been doing consultation helping Frank LaRue. I think most of you know Frank, the outgoing special rapporteur, on the issue of content and connectivity. So I think the first one is a request. If there's anyone who's got information on content and connectivity issues in Africa and you want this to be raised at UN level, please, if you can get in touch with me before the conference ends. But the question that I have is that Mr. LaRue talks about mass surveillance, that in the era of modern technologies, state surveillance has meant that the internet, instead of being the means for expression, has become a means for repression, especially for journalists and human rights defenders. So the question is, to what extent is that research finding a reality in Africa? Is surveillance affecting you as journalists? And number two, in addressing the issue of mass surveillance, there are usually two alternatives, the policy route and the technological route. Which route do you think we should go, the technological or the policy route? And in terms of the technological route, what sort of support do you think African journalists need in order for them to be cushioned from state mass surveillance? Thank you.
Thank you. Those brilliant questions. Are there only two remaining questions? So maybe we take the two and then we move to the task force. Please.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the brilliant presentation. My name is Ibrahim Tomi. I come from Sierra Leone. I'd like to talk about community radio. Henry talked about some positive development happening across the continent of Africa in terms of the media, and I think it's important to underscore the fact that community radio has, to a large extent, transformed the way we communicate in the capitals right across to communities. But somebody talked about capacity gap, and I also wanted to use this opportunity to talk about how much support these community radio stations need, because that is really the tool that is bringing information in an easy-to-understand way to local communities, and that is empowering. That is just a kind of connects communities to what happens in headquarters, but they need a lot of support in terms of technical support, funding, and all of that. But there's also another issue that I'd like to talk about, which is the independent media. Across the continent, we are observing that many multinational corporations, even the government, private businesses, are more likely to advertise with, media that is pro-government, to the extent that the independent media is starved of resources. So ultimately, they either join, the ruling party, or they are starved out of the business. And I think it's important that we pay attention to them too. One final point on the issue of social media. Unfortunately,
please make it very brief. We have to move on.
Unfortunately, I think we use social media for the most part to share photos of outing fun. What is Facebook, for example, and all other groups doing to do education across the continent about how we can utilize social media for activism and indeed to promote democracy? Thank you.
Thank you. Last question before we go back to the task force.
Yeah, my name is Robert Sempala. I come from Uganda, and I work with Human Rights Network for Journalists Uganda. I'm a journalist, and I've served in this trade for about 13 years. I want to associate myself entirely with the working group on the media. But something is really key about self-censorship of the media in African democracies. African governments would pay handsomely now to control the media. And most of them are legislating towards government control of the media. And that is a danger, because the cardinal principles the media must live to today have been reduced to infotainment. Many media houses in Africa are playing that role of entertaining their audiences. And that reduces the importance the media should play to only that sole providing, but ignores the critical areas which might pity the media houses against their governments. So by going forward, I would recommend that there is a very systematic way of tasking African leaders to come out openly and support the work of the media and desist from making hate speech against free, critical, and independent media. That is a very big missing link. But two, as I conclude, there are is lack of systematic ways of defending critical journalists as individuals. In my country, Uganda, over 3 years, we have documented about 200 cases involving security agents orchestrating violence against journalists, but none of these cases have been logically investigated and concluded. So many journalists fear to trade now dangerously. They trade cautiously, and in the process, they leave so many critical issues that would mean a lot to their publics and communities unattended to for fear of the aftermath. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's very quick.
I see two people standing. We are getting short on time. Can you have 30 seconds? Sure. State clearly and concisely your comments, and we move. Is that okay?
My name is Eugenia Temba, and I am from Zambia. I'm working with Freedom House Southern Africa there. Earlier this year, Freedom House released its Freedom of the Press report, and it shows that freedom of the press in Africa has significantly declined, and globally the trends are at their lowest in a decade. The concerns that I have to do with journalists that are. What we're beginning to see is becoming a pattern of governments using defamation and insult laws against journalists in the course of their work. And I just want to recommend that there should be some consideration for the establishment of a protection and defense mechanism for journalists that do find themselves facing such cases as a result of their work.
Thank you. 30 seconds.
Okay, I'm Amadou Jane, and what a coincidence we get Gambia and Zambia to wrap it up. And I'm from the Gambia, and I used to be an information minister, and you know the Gambia is one of the most repressive, particularly in the domain of the media. And I don't know what your definition of liberalization means, including the Gambia, unless you are considering having a plethora of media restricting themselves to sports and entertainment programming. Otherwise, the Gambia would be elsewhere, not amongst anything, liberalization or anything close to it. Thank you.
Are you there, Anna?
I'm sorry, I didn't know that was the last person to ask the question, but I'm going to be very brief. I am from Kenya, and being from Kenya and living in the Washington, D.C., I read more about the news going on in Africa. And I know that in Kenya we are trying to move from analog to digital, but we also have a problem whereby in many aspects of all the rural areas in Africa, they really don't even have the proper media like television. So what will the media do to make sure that we have that first before we move to digital?
Got it. Thank you. Now we're moving to our panel. Please, there have been a series of questions raised, very serious questions about surveillance and issues around, all the issues around privacy, questions around technical versus policy, how to deal with repression on the ground, what are the needs for journalists, questions around community-based radio, independent media, how to get the government to actually create a space to respect independent media, and lots of questions around violence against journalists, what tools are needed both for the investigation of cases and to prevent the further exercise of these abusive rights. So we'll just kind of go from this end down. Anyone who wants to comment, please just keep your comments brief. Thank you.
I'm Rafael Marques from Angola. And just on the question of surveillance, I think it's more important to provide technological assistance to journalists because, just to give an example, last year I was a victim of a hacking, and it was discovered by a hacktivist, a US hacktivist. And he traced back the hacker to India. And he even traced the company that provided the funding for that project, which was in Portugal. And the transaction was done in France. It's just to explain what happens with digital surveillance. It's transnational. And Angola is also one of the countries in Africa that has recruited a notorious German company, Finfisher, to install a surveillance program that all the emails, digital communications go through this process. So there is no legislation that can deal with that, but technological support to enable journalists to circumvent that level of sophistication. One example, for instance, I have a website, and Google was kind enough to allow it to be on Google Shield, a program set up to protect websites at risk from hackers. This is just one example, and I'll stop here. Thanks.
Thank you. Please.
Thank you. My name is Mandala Mamblasa. I come from Malawi. Just brief comments on the issue of hate speech, which was raised by the lady from South Sudan. True, I think in many countries, hate speech is not protected by freedom of expression and media laws. South Africa is one good example. You find it in the Constitution. But I think we must be quick to agree that we still have a problem in regulating social media. So until we find a solution, it's very difficult to deal with some of these problems. So, but generally speaking, hate speech is not protected by freedom of expression. One of a lady from, I think, she complained about civil society not being covered, and you know, when this issue was raised, for example, in my country, just to give an example, the newspapers, the radios, they said that we don't have resources to cover everyone. And the people that we cover, they help us. So they'll come pick a reporter, or they'll help us. So I don't know to what extent that, you know, civil society organizations in your country also are willing to, you know, help the media houses, because it's not practically possible for them to be, you know, covering everyone at the same time. So I think there's a role that we also who want to be covered can play to make sure that we are covered. Journalists that are facing challenges, arrested and whatever, I think we can build networks with some of the professional bodies in our countries, like bar associations, law societies. They have human rights subcommittees. They have lawyers who are willing to do, you know, work on pro bono basis. Those links, I think, can help us to, you know, strengthen relations and ensure that, you know, once in a while, maybe lawyers could be available to be able to defend journalists like that. Thank you.
Thank you. This will be our final comment.
Je voudrais intervenir par rapport à la couverture de surtout les mauvaises nouvelles en Afrique. Ça nous fait mal qu'on croit souvent qu'en Afrique, il n'y a rien de bon. Surtout sur les médias étrangers, dès qu'il y a guerre, dès qu'il y a conflit, c'est ce que tu entends. Mais quand il s'agit de couvrir un seul bon élément en Afrique, ce n'est pas possible. Parce que la liberté d'expression, comme on aime le dire, on crie partout, la liberté de l'expression, ce n'est pas aussi garanti que ça. Et il faut reconnaître aussi que les médias privés de nos jours sont surtout dominés par, comment est-ce qu'on appelle, par des hommes politiques qui créent ces radios-là. Et tu ne peux pas créer ta radio, payer un journaliste, et qu'il va parler, ce journaliste-là va parler de ta corruption que tu es en train de faire au sein d'un ministère ou bien au sein de l'hémicycle. Ce n'est pas possible. Et n'en parlons pas des médias publics qui sont contrôlés dans l'ensemble par les pouvoirs publics. Parce que tu ne peux pas, chez moi, je donne un exemple. Tout récemment, il y a des journalistes qui ont été vus écartés complètement de leurs organes parce que tout simplement, ils ont osé parler de l'affaire de l'avion présidentiel au Mali. Tout simplement parce qu'ils parlent de l'avion du président, on le met à l'écart. Donc, si on n'a pas le droit, on n'a pas le pouvoir de parler de ce qui se passe, ils sont en train de se rabattre sur ceux qui peuvent faire acheter leurs papiers. Parler des catastrophes, parler des guerres. Là, au moins, le citoyen lambda qui va passer, il va dire, ah, il paraît qu'il y a guerre, comment est-ce qu'on appelle, au nord du Mali. Il paraît qu'il y a conflit par là. Il voit le titre, il va l'acheter. Là, au moins, tu es sûr, toi, journaliste, on va acheter ton papier parce que tu as parlé de catastrophe. Au lieu de parler des problèmes réels qui concernent la nation. Et là, je suis entièrement d'accord avec ma grande sœur. Il faut que la société civile s'investisse davantage pour qu'il y ait plus de liberté d'expression dans nos différents pays en Afrique. Merci.
Well, please join me in thanking this fabulous task force for the work that they have done, for their leadership on this sector on the continent, and for their vision to raise up the power of the media to bring change. We thank you, and we now create a space now for the next panel to come forward.